It's the end of 2020. Finally. This year has been dragging ass, as we all know. So, let's let it be by the by, and just cheers to the New Year's. I'm drinking a Stone Brewery beer, I guess. It seemed to be pretty good. I'm sure you guys have a pint in hand as well. Now, let's get into some of the major facets of what 2020 was. Well, first it was shit, but aside from that, you have the whole COVID-19 pandemic, which happened, and it fucked up every single industry. I remember in the very beginning when I was doing press interviews, it seems like a really long time ago, to where I was doing interviews at the LCS studio. And basically it was the fans were eliminated at the very beginning, so there could be no fans. And then right after that was press. And so then after that were, of course, the players and all the staffing and whatnot. And I think it didn't really affect Riot or League of Legends that much. In fact, they were very quick to set up their own infrastructure. They had, I think it was like the week pause, I want to say, to where there were just no games whatsoever, and LCS was kind of on hold, I believe. And they were setting up all their shit, all their remote broadcast ideas and whatnot, and they executed it. It was a little rough in the very beginning, but I thought they did a pretty good job. Now, as far as I want to go into another esport that I infrequently watch, but it's Counter-Strike Go. I think it affected them massively, in fact. More specifically, it obviously affected the arenas to where, Counter-Strike Go it's more of a tournament-based structure, right? To where it's different tournaments and a circuit, and then you have the majors and whatnot. So I think it affected them like disproportionately as much, because first then you have the whole idea of online versus offline, right? And while yes, that does have some effect for a game like League of Legends, it has a much bigger effect, I think, for Counter-Strike, just because of the difference in ping is very significant for an FPS, for instance, versus, a MOBA, right? MOBA is more about your brain and how you, manipulate your character around the map or your champion, versus, FPS, it's just quick reaction, So, and that affects various different guns in different ways and whatnot. But Counter-Strike had a really tough go of it, I think. And then, of course, you had one of their other scandals, which was what I like to call Spectate Gate, where coaches were using that bug to where, if you guys didn't know, because I assume most of my audience is League of Legends, is that in Counter-Strike, coaches were spectating, and this was during the online era. And usually what you can only do is spectate from a specific player or whatnot. Now, they figured out a way to spectate, and it's basically dropping their point of view on a specific portion of the map, and it stays there for the entire game. And obviously, that's going to be a problem, right? Because all you do is have to drop yourself at a bomb site, right? So say you drop yourself at A, and you're the terrorists. Well, then if you have eyes on A, then you could say, hey, there's only 2 people at A, meaning that there's probably 3 people over at the other bomb site. You should come to A instead. And you could watch the rotates as well too. So yeah, it was just a whole big fucking mess. Whole bunch of coaches ended up getting banned. You have that ESIC organization, which is doing a phenomenal job in terms of going through like thousands of demos basically by hand and reviewing them to see who abused this bug and punishing them accordingly, or at least informing the tournament organizers to then punish them accordingly. And also working hand in hand with Valve, I believe, or lack thereof, maybe. So that was a really big thing, and that probably would have never happened, or rather, maybe we would have never caught it if not for COVID, right? Because there are offline qualifiers or online qualifiers to then go to the offline tournament, the LAN tournament. So, teams could have been cheating throughout this entire time, which is actually what ESIC is going back to do. They're going back in time to look at, 2016, 2017, 2018, like way back. So that's going to reveal a lot of heavy shit. So like, I, for one, am excited that that's happening because it's just ousting out all the bad actors within the entire industry. So like good shit on them. And I love what ESIC is doing. So then, of course, you had COVID for the League of Legends Championship, right? And now this one was pretty big, but it wasn't crazy, right? Because there was still the LAN aspect that they were able to hold, somewhat like what the NBA was doing in terms of having like this bubble system or whatnot. So I thought that was very interesting. So now, with that said, that meant that press were doing interviews remotely, right? So they would have some setup over in China, and you would kind of remote broadcast in and ask them your questions. There'd be a little bit of a delay or whatnot, and then you could kind of go from there. And it was obviously it's not as good as being there in person and whatnot, because there is the addition of, say for instance, like warming up the player. That's a very common thing to do when interviewing, is that you have a little bit of chit chat as you're setting up your equipment or whatnot. You're getting them into the shot, everything like that. And it just makes things a little bit more casual, right? And less business-like, but wasn't really able to do that come around this time. So that was a little bit of an annoyance, but also it's kind of a good thing for me because I wouldn't have gotten the chance to go to China anyways. So, whether COVID or not. So this gave me the chance at least to go to this tournament, right? And get a couple different interviews, which was very cool, right? And I'm, very grateful for that. And additionally, though, this was my first time doing it. And so I had an interview with Damwon Gaming's head coach, Zepha. And I noticed throughout that interview that it was incredibly short because Riot gives you only 10 minutes to do an interview. And so when you're doing that in a foreign language, well, obviously there's the translator. So half of the time is spent translating. And so realistically, you only get a 5-minute interview with, a player or a coach or whatever, right? Which very much so limits your questions and just limits the amount of time and also limits the answers as well, too. On top of that, you have to think to not ask so complex of questions and to maybe provide massive amounts of context, which I usually like to do when I formulate my questions. Is I will ask, a player something, and I will follow up of context of maybe the surrounding situations of it, maybe what the fans think about it, and so on and so forth, and then have them answer in whatever context or way that they want to grab onto that entire question. It's a little bit more difficult to do when there's a translator because you need to think of the translation time and process and not to make it too complex for them so that they don't forget what I was even talking about in the question. So very difficult, but that regardless, that would have happened anyways in person, right? So this was just my first experience with it. So it was very interesting. Speaking of interviews, ESPN going under. Wow. Who would have thought? No, actually, I was a little bit surprised. I would figure that they would have just downscaled more and then eventually slowly faded into the shadows and act like, they were never there. But no, they just completely dropped everything. And that was kind of surprising, but then again, if you look at what happened before with Yahoo Esports, we all remember, it was big dick swinging, coming in, acting like you're going to own the space. Same thing that ESPN tried to do, and it just didn't work out because they really didn't have anything revolutionary that they brought to the table. It's like, cool, you get all the big name writers and you just throw them on this roster and away you go, and hopefully you dominate the space. And yeah, to some extent they did. They also had the clout of being ESPN, right? So that's something that's huge that they brought to the scene, which we should all be grateful for, at least in hindsight. But I didn't really think that ESPN did anything revolutionary, and also I just think they went about their whole vertical in like a kind of a bad way, right? Like, one of the things that pissed me off about ESPN was they never hyperlinked to any other article ever. Like, their outlinking was just complete shit. And I don't blame the writers, right? Because that's not the writer's fault. And I don't blame the small editor's faults either. It's more of a editor-in-chief type scenario, or, you know, someone even maybe higher up than them. So I just thought that was a little odd. And then combined with that, of course, their whole thing of trying to take, what was it, Avali's talk show or whatnot, which had the same kind of color schema and just felt very similar. But then again, as other people noted, it's not that unique of an idea, and there are multiple Good Morning shows regardless. So you can't necessarily say that this was, you know, completely stolen, but I do get it. It did feel a little odd. But ESPN, not really going to miss the outlet at all. In fact, I just feel sad for the writers that, you know, now that they don't have a job or whatnot, but I'm sure they'll land on their feet, and I'm sure they'll get into another website. And also, I think one of the biggest problems that is going on with journalism and whatnot, and I'm not saying that I know how to fix it, or else I would have already fixed it, but one big thing is that, at least from what I saw with ESPN and a lot of other websites, is that they want to focus on the epic shit, right? They want to focus on the Iliads, the Magnus Opus articles. And that's fine to do, but you have to have some form of consistency of just, you know, doing all the mediocre news and shit, and maybe even doing some of the, you know, more pop culture type-esque stuff of esports, which is, of course, commenting on streamers, and this streamer said this, or this streamer said that, or, you know, whatever the fuck, right? Sort of like a live stream fails type aspect. There's got to be some of that within your website too. You can't just focus on all the hardcore shit unless you're willing to take the consequences of only doing the hardcore shit, which means that you probably can't pay your writers as much because, you know, you guys aren't getting the traffic required to get all these different sponsors and whatnot. You also probably aren't going to have the budget to get very big names, right? So it's this whole problem, this cyclical problem that seems to be running within esports quite a lot, and just journalism in general. And I think, you know, always compare this, because this is kind of the idea that I see, or the setup that I'm seeing that is working well, which is Izento. Like, they're doing that shit too. They're doing all the pop culture-y shit, the little clickbaity shit, but they also support writers to do very good writing, right? Like Richard Lewis being able to do his reporting and release big landmark esports shit on there. But you don't get the Richard Lewises if you don't have the Pokimane said this on stream on Tuesday, you know? Like, it's like, I'm sorry. So I think that's one aspect in which I think ESPN could have brushed up their shit on, right? So that was one thing. So another thing, Doublelift and Bjergsen retiring. How fucking big was that? And that just recently I still don't know what to think about it. Like, and on top of that, I still need to write 2 epic articles about just their careers and maybe their impact, what I thought about them, etc. So look out for that, you know, within the coming month or 2. I don't know. But how big of a hole is there now? both in ADC and mid, and just being personalities within the entire space. I mean, of course, Doublelift, he brought this rambunctiousness, right? He's a very outspoken player, outspoken personality. And then you had Bjergsen, who was like always the face of TSM, while also being, one of the best mid laners in North America. And, I think we can say without a doubt the best mid laner in North America as far as longevity and performance and history and whatnot. So it's very shocking that they just all of a sudden decided to retire. More specifically, Bjergsen deciding to retire, because it looked like he was still obviously one of the best mid laners in North America. So I think it was a burden on him and maybe a weight on him. And him shifting over into the coaching role is really big news to me. And I did a piece before about Bjergsen and how I don't think he's fit to be a leader. And this was before his announcement as trying to become a head coach anyways. And so this was actually before Worlds, in fact, I want to say. And it was in preparation of that, well, we know how Bjergsen is going to perform at Worlds. He's going to be this supportive player, and he's not going to be enabled at all. And he's never been enabled from his coaching staff whatsoever, because his coaching staff has always either shifted or they just lacked coaching staff itself, right? Like Parth becoming head coach for the last 2 years is pretty shitty, because he has always stated that he has never wanted to be a head coach anyways, at least from his original stint. And so now you're forcing him into a role that he doesn't want, which I don't know if you guys fucking know this, but when you're at a job that you don't like doing, you probably aren't going to be very good at it. So it just seems very strange that now he is going into the coaching role, and it feels like this is his last chance to say, I've tried everything else to try and win. I've tried every fucking possible thing except coaching. Let's try that. Let's try and win Worlds through coaching. So this feels like a little bit of a desperation play, right? To still hang on to the dream of winning Worlds, but doing it in a different form or a different fashion. So I thought that was very, very big news. But going on to some of my shit now, and maybe what I've gone through this year. Man, I don't know about you guys, but one of my favorite styles of beer is IPA. I love me some stouts, and I like porters as well too. Those are pretty good, but IPAs are super bomb. And who would have thought that this old-fashioned way of doing beer, which was what IPA was, to where they would throw in a whole bunch of hops into the beer for a shipment, because they had to travel very far, long distances to ship this beer. And so you had the hops to kind of stabilize the entire brewing aspect or beer until it got to its destination. And that's how we got IPAs. But we obviously don't need to do that anymore. Anyways, side tangent. This year, I've done 99 pieces of content. As of, I think my last piece was on December 22nd or something that I released. This will be the 100th piece for this year. And I wanted to... This idea came to me while I was watching the Social Dilemma movie, that documentary about how social media is kind of shaping our entire landscape, and political or just general, or it's also having an effect on our youth and whatnot. And there was this portion, which by the way, I think that the documentary was good, but it was very obvious what they were pointing out. But then again, the whole thing is that since it's such a social phenomenon, I guess, of a documentary, is that at least it puts to light all the common problems of social media and whatnot. But point being is that it got on to this idea that I thought was very unique, in that social media platforms, some of their biggest competition isn't in fact social media, or rather that's not how they think of it. Twitter's number one rival is Facebook, or like Twitter doesn't like Instagram, or then there's TikTok or something, right? It's not that. At the very root and the very seed of it all is, it's about attention, grabbing attention. How much attention can you grab? Because at the very seed of it, that's what any form of entertainment actually is. That's movies, that's video games, that's social media, that's fucking YouTube and videos. Like, everything is trying to compete for your attention. Even ads are competing for your attention. And so that is no different with content creation. This is like kind of spawned an epiphany for me, but it's that's why you see there are multiple different content creators that try and at least tell you a lot to stream every day, have a schedule, stream, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, right? Because you're keeping that attention, right? And you're holding someone's attention. And as soon as you kind of break that connection, then someone else is going to grab that attention, right? And so all these content creators and all these streamers and all these writers are just fighting for fans' attentions at the end of the day. And so that's why it's important to pump out a lot of content, right? And you don't have to have a magnus opus every single time, but it's the fact that you are just pumping out content and reminding people that you're still there. So that's where I was going with this whole 100-piece idea per year. I've been doing 100 pieces of content, I think since 2018. So it's over 300 pieces of content in 3 years, which is awesome, And this was primarily through opinion pieces, either written or video, and then interviews. I don't do written news, right? Like I don't do the regular news of, like I said, talking about fucking Shroud or XQC or whatever. I don't do that. Or I don't do, Riot has released this new thing and here's what it is. It's like, no, usually it'll be what I think about said thing and what has been released, right? So it's way more opinionated than anything. Now, I think there's very few within the entire esports industry, or just, esports, and we'll just stick with esports, that is meaning to do multiple different pieces and push out content to an extreme extent. And I think it's missed that through the grind, eventually you end up realizing what makes your content tick. Every year I seem to have an epiphany about what I think makes my content tick, what I did correctly, and what I can still future improve upon, right? So, as for instance, I think to give my opinions on some other content creators, for instance, I think Travis Gafford, like, there's something still to learn from him, in the sense that I think he's very good for beginners, right? Like he knows the basics. He's very like fundamentals basic, and for good or for ill. But the point is that he has pretty much mastered those, and it's really good and refreshing to just look at his style of interviewing and being able to pull all those fundamentals and kind of study him and break that down part by part, because he doesn't muddy about and do any particularly fancy shit, right? So, and obviously you can only realize this through him having the attention of multiple different fans, and because he puts out so much different amounts and pieces of content. So I think he should at least be majorly respected within the entire landscape. Emily Rand is pretty cool. By the way, congrats to her for winning Esports Journalist of the Year. I think that is super fucking cool, because it's been a long time coming. But I think Emily Rand in her style is very great for intermediates in ways of, she's a very emotionally driven writer, and it's really cool because no one else has, or at least has perfected that style to the degree that she has, right? So you can go specifically to that, or look for that style in her and kind of learn how to maybe incorporate that style into your own. And so, like, you would never know that if she didn't do a fucking gazillion pieces, right? And then you have people like Richard Lewis, or Kelsey Moser, I guess, is getting back into it now, which is great to see, which I think they are at a crazy level of their own. For instance, like, I think Richard Lewis, he's probably the best, like, writer, just pure fucking writing. I think his writing style is really fucking good. And then Kelsey Moser, she's very analytical while also incorporating good writing styles to not make it completely dry, which is fantastic, right? But point being is that multiple different pieces of content means that you have more attention, and so therefore it kind of justifies when you do these magnus opus pieces, these pieces that you've put a lot of time and a lot of work into. Like, that's just running, like I said, with the principle that ESPN failed to do, which is to pump out a whole bunch of different content and have that supplementary content to then make justifications for the magnus opus pieces. So as a content creator, you just need to do the same exact thing. Now, yeah, maybe not stoop to the level of, like I said, Pokemon said this on a fucking Thursday, but you can still at least kind of have some morals about your own shit, and then go from there and go forth and start producing mass amounts of content. As far as what I want to end this with, my favorite interview this year, at least from the entire landscape perspective, was definitely that Dardoch interview. It was very awesome to see the reaction of the community and how it began to start a new conversation, maybe about how TSM functions with their junglers, or rather to maybe continue the conversation of that, right? So I thought that was very unique in that sense, and that's why I liked that interview, I guess. But then again, there wasn't very many interviews this year that I did anyways. I think I slowed down a little more on interviews because of the whole fucking COVID situation. But at the very end, I want to share my plans for 2021, which is that I want to do a new series. So I'm going to be launching a new series in 2021, so stay tuned for that one. And then I also want to return more into my series, my older series, which is The Tragic Story of, and where I explain different League of Legends players throughout history that have had tragic stories, to where maybe they could have had a bigger and brighter career, or maybe accomplished their goals if only certain things, certain key things went their way. So I thought that was a very interesting series, and I want to go back to that because I just really haven't had the crazy inspiration of doing it, but it's also that I've just been focusing on other shit, right? So I want to return to that, and then of course I'm still going to be doing these types of videos where it's just me babbling into the microphone, as it were, anyways. So look forward to that. Also, I've been thinking about maybe trying to do a little bit more of collaborations. I don't know. We'll see what falls in my lap. Usually when people want to do collaborations, I just kind of like, nah, I'm just doing my own shit. I'm way too fucking busy, because I already work a regular 9-to-5 job anyways. So all in all, I actually didn't think 2020 was crazy super bad. It was pretty shitty. At least my 2020 was kind of shitty, and I assume has been the same thing for multiple different people. But let's hope for a better 2021. 2020 was still kind of fun, though. At least it was entertaining, right? So we can at least say that. And I look forward to creating more content coming into the new year. So, Happy New Year's, guys. and I will see you on the other side.